Welcome everyone to another Reltio community show. My name is Chris Detzel, and I am the Director of Customer Community and Engagement here at Reltio. Today we have a special guest, Joe DosSantos. He's the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Qlik. So Joe, thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So the rules of the show, as usual, please keep yourself on mute. All questions should be asked in the chat, or please take yourself off mute and ask, and then put yourself back on mute. The community show will be recorded and posted to the Reltio community probably sometime later today or sometime tomorrow. We do have some upcoming events. Today's show is with Joe DosSantos on Qlik's case study, Driving Qlik's MDM program success. Funny enough, we have another show on the 10th, which is just 2 days from now, on data quality management, commercial pharma MDM landscape with Takeda. Really excited about that one as well. And then on the 17th, applying the Forrester TEI calculator to your enterprise. That finally came out. So we want to help you understand that a little bit better. And then on December 1st, how data stewards, analysts, and business users can use the most of the new Reltio UI. And then on the 8th, we have emerging trends in data management. So really a lot of really great stuff coming up here on the shows. And Joe, the reason I do that is it gives people time to come in. We had 5 people in, and now we have 40 something. So, but I'll let you go ahead and maybe introduce yourself and just kick it off, Joe.
Sure. So my name is Joe DosSantos, and I am the Chief Data Analytics Officer at Qlik. And I'm going to tell the story a little bit about the formation of the data office. I am the first, the inaugural CDO, if you will, for Qlik. And I think we're facing what many people are as we start to get data offices off the ground. And so I want to tell you that story and how we started to make our notion of Customer 360 the centerpiece of a lot of the things that we're doing, and how Reltio became an important partner for us. So this is a little bit of a story of what we did, our journey, and it will include a demonstration of our Customer 360 solution at the end, the analytics solution. And Chris, just to confirm, you can see my screen? Cool. All right, so a little bit about Qlik just to start. We are a 25-year-old software company in the analytics space. We do analytics and integration. Globally, about 38,000 customers in the market, principally of trying to help people figure out what's in front of them and things they didn't know to know for analytics. We have an auto ML capability, different things like that. But fundamentally, think about us as a software company. And as a result of that, the things that we are trying to do in terms of trying to grow our business are trying to improve retention rate, trying to improve annual recurring revenue, which is ARR, which is the principal driver of a lot of the software companies today. So really a lot of the classic software company type of goals that we're trying to do. So I'm going to take you through the formation of our data office. What is it that we do? Why did we come to exist, and what our goals are? And then a little bit about the origins of the customer data program itself. And, anyone who's done this for a little bit understands that technology is the last part of figuring out what to do. The beginning parts are really orienting yourselves around what the corporate goals are going to be, what the nomenclature is that you're going to use for customers, how to use a common taxonomy, vocabulary for how you talk about these different things. So I want to take you through that journey, how we did that. And then I'm actually going to show you what we did and what we built as a solution for solving some of our key problems. And then I'll finish off by telling you a little bit about what comes next for us. So no rest for the weary. We're going to be moving on to other domains, but I'll save that drama for the end of our presentation here. So we formed the data office in 2020. And like I said, I was the first CDO. And so effectively, we went out to create a mission statement that, you can read this, but at the end of the day, what people want is the right data at the right time in the right place to make good decisions. And at the time, Qlik had this notion of what we called the third generation of business intelligence. And I will bore you a little bit with this, right? Because I think it's relevant in terms of how we started to conceptualize our thinking. So if you believe the story, it goes something like this. If you were around in the 1990s and that means you're old like I am, you spend most of your time thinking about how to implement data warehouses. And you would think about how you're going to take all of these different sources and convert things into one big physical model. It would take 9 months to get started. And by the time you finished, you were frustrated because you never got what you wanted and truth was elusive. And so you had this whole notion about really trying to manage truth, but it was a little bit overwhelming and rarely delivered results. So I posit to you that there was this rebellion of sorts, which was born as Qlik and Tableau and Domo, and they work all around your IT people trying to say, just throw in a dashboard and trust it. So you have this kind of citizen data developer. But the problem is that you flipped too far to the outside. It's really fast, but Johnny's analytics very rarely align with Jimmy's and Joni's analytics. So everyone's kind of creating their own insights, and there's a lot of democratization and flexibility, but really no kind of cornerstone of truth. And that leads to this third generation, which is a hybrid model. What can we do? I often talk about this as centralizing the back end so as to liberate the front end. How do we make sure that we have governance in place that starts to understand how do we think about data domains accurately being put together, almost like Lego blocks, so that when people start to assemble their analytics, they're doing so from the same kernels of data. And then the mission of the CDO in that respect is really to broker the right data to the right analytics problem so that you can make sure that people are using the right data for their analytics, right? So it's this kind of back to the center, which is there can't really be total absolute control from the center, nor can there be a wild, wild west in the edges, and you're working through a governance and brokering effort. So you're going to see some of that thinking as we start to get into that. We called that the third generation of business intelligence. So we had some principles like really should be easy. It should be easy for our customers to get the data. We really want to embrace this idea of self-service, data democratization. This would then lead into data literacy, different concepts like that. And of course, at the end, of course, we wanted to showcase some of our own software products so that we could show off to other people. So what that led to was this concept of domain thinking. So most of us in the data world have been familiar with the idea of a data domain. But this is not necessarily something that is natural to everybody. And so what we started to do is to really illuminate the constructs of a domain. Let's get really specific. And again, words matter. And so how do we start to think about source domains and consumer domains? For us, there were source domains, which were, this is what gets put into the systems. You can't help that opportunities are going into your CRM system a certain way. That's just the way it was. You can't help the way things are booked necessarily. That's just the way they are. And so effectively, you have these transactions that exist in your source systems. They are, of course, enabled by master data and reference data that makes sure that you can actually get the transactional systems, that the transactions in the system in a standard that you want. And so a lot of times we talk about managing data at the source, and this is kind of what we're talking about. How do we make sure that the best quality is available for these source domains? And those things are defined. Those are efforts that we use to define data as it's being executed in the business. But then, as you guys know, that data gets turned into calculations, computations, derivatives. And for us, what we started to do was to create these standard calculations. Think about these as recipes. There's a recipe for ARR, annual recurring revenue. You want to know how much a total contract value is for a contract, the TCV versus the annual contract value. And so there shouldn't be any ambiguity about that, how that calculation works. So our group is meant to standardize these kinds of, we call them the red bubbles and the green bubbles for no real good reason, that we're trying to make sure that when people go to shop for data in a democratized way from our catalog, they're getting the best of what we have without the ability to reuse this stuff. And so we really started to get a group of people together that were VP level to help us create ownership models for these domains. Because if you kind of read some of the work around like in data kitchen or data ops kind of work, that idea of business ownership is really key and imperative before you move forward. We don't get to decide what data means. We want to get ownership for that data in place. Oops. So that's cool. But what does ownership mean, right? Like we all go, oh, business should own stuff, but then that becomes rather ambiguous. So what we did is we created a very specific model that we called our DAMS model. So for every single domain of data, we wanted there to be 4 areas of responsibility. Number 1, you needed to be able to define that term. Number 2, so by the way, define that might be obvious, but like we needed to make sure that someone had clarity in terms of what it meant, how it was used, And that's different, of course, if it's something that happens in a source system versus a calculation. The second is, how do we start to make sure that we have clarity around who's going to authorize the use of that data? So in a world in which things are increasingly sensitive, complex, GDPR calculations, how do we make sure that there is a single point of contact that we can monitor and track to make sure that, yes, finance authorizes the use of our ARR data? The third is, how does that data actually get into the system? We call that management. So who's going to put their hands on the keyboard on a daily basis and make sure that opportunities are created? So who ultimately is accountable for the quality of that data, for the operational control of that data? And then finally, when all hell breaks loose and that data is all crappy because we've realized a quality violation, who's going to be on the hook to clean it up? Who is going to steward that data? And how do we make sure that that data is repaired in a world where it gets broken? I'm sure that your organizations don't have broken data. I'm sure, but ours certainly does. So what we said in this model is it could be for some localized department data, that could be many people or it could be one. And then what we set out to do in a rather time-consuming, but I would recommend essential model is we set out to fill out the DAMS model for every single one of our domains. We had 256 domains that we created. And we went and we said, okay, so for master data up here, the CDO is going to define, authorize, manage, and steward. Well, this was our call to action, right? This was, if you want to know why we have a customer 360 solution, is because this is the impetus where we created business ownership. And sometimes there are just domains that are too hard for any one business group to manage. And in this group, we were called to action. They said, please, for customers and contacts, can you please take ownership of that? For product, we'll have product management do that. For vendor, we'll have finance do that, et cetera. And then we started to do, below here are all the different departmental data. Okay, so now we have a mandate. We have an ask from the business, and we're starting to set up governance programs and ownership models to construct these things. But we need to get our house in order because we've been asked by the business to manage customer. Great. So, so we started to set off in terms of what does that mean? And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the movie The Princess Bride. Inigo Montoya says to, he says, he keeps saying inconceivable, and he says, you keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. And customer for us was exactly the same. People would say, oh, we incent our sales reps on new logos. Is a logo the same as a customer? Is a logo the same as an account? What's a company? What's a subscriber? What's a corporation? What are you talking about? Prospects, customer? So we had all of these different things that we needed to do that were literally about figuring out what the words were that mattered so that we could align our organization on how those things looked and felt, so that when we had reporting in those bubbles, we could make sure that we were clear in terms of what was required. And so that started off with something that looked like this. And these are modeled loosely, I would say, maybe not so loosely, on a lot of Dun and Bradstreet kinds of concepts where you have holding companies, global headquarters. Now, for us, the difference between, let's say, a DUNS number and a holding company, as we all kind of know that while Berkshire Hathaway owns Benjamin Moore Paints, we probably think about it as a different kind of company, right? So that became really important for us to separate these kind of different parts of the hierarchy from each other. So you have holding companies, global companies, national headquarters, and then there was an entity that we called the contracting entity. A contracting entity is someone who will ultimately sign the paperwork. So there's an account in Salesforce that closes an opportunity. They are the entity. This is going to be 3M in Spain in particular. That's going to be that contracting entity. And then there are people that will be hanging off of those things as contacts. So obviously, when we got to this part, hierarchy management became really important for us, which is part of the reason that something like Reltio became really attractive to us. And so this was all important for us for grounding us on what the words mattered. And then what we started to do was to say, well, let's become clear around what activities are happening against each of these different things. So it became clear to us that, we wanted to do territory assignment at one level. We wanted to actually contract and close business at another level. We were going to do white space analysis at a level. We were going to do campaign management at a level. And this became really super important for us to clarify what the requirements were going to be. Okay, so now we have a mandate. We have clear definitions. But I'm sure that most of you have experienced that that's really just the beginning, because you need money. You need a funding vehicle to actually make some of these things take place. So I always feel that data, for those of you that remember data warehouses, you're going to remember Bette Midler songs. She had this great song, "You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings." I think about data as just the same. We get no glory for anything. Having the right data is table stakes to make heroes out of our business sponsors. So at this moment, we had to start to figure out who in our business would be the heroes of a customer data initiative, because it wasn't going to be free. So we locked arms with our customer success organization and said, let's start to talk through what the value of data would be for you. And they said, oh, geez, I feel like we're losing renewals left and right because things are trapped in a hierarchy and we can't see them. We try to create these forecasts and they're never any good because we can't see which customers are coming due. There's duplicates in the system, so they get double counted all the time. I feel like we're leaking some things because we're basically creating duplicate customers and then giving people a new logo incentive and paying out spiffs that they're not entitled to. And so we have all of these, and we also have pricing caps that are negotiated in the contracts that we ignore. So we're entitled to a price increase that we don't take advantage of because we actually don't even realize that there's an umbrella contract for those price increases. So I won't share with you the numbers, but we were able to make a financial case. If we were able to increase this by 0.5%, if we were able to do this by 1%, would that break even? And that was the winning argument. And then there was kind of an ancillary benefit, of course, which was we really want to be able to focus on upselling within the company. That's a sales thing. We really want to be able to have an effective C-level discussion. You want to be able to go meet with the CEO. You want to have something that can enable and empower a QBR with your customer, legal complexity, all these different things. Great. So now we've got our financials. And what we need to start to say is, well, what do we believe the root cause of that is? Number one is we have really crappy hierarchy information. We have 550, this is true, 550 different Siemens accounts, and we have no idea what's what. So unless we get our arms around that, we're hopelessly lost. And then we also were having a hard time figuring out where all of these licenses were attached, and we needed to have a way to make sure that we could combine all of our transactional data to this core. So we needed to not only be able to create a common key for these customers, but we needed a vehicle to be able to tie all of the activities to these hierarchies so that we could slice it and dice it however we wanted. Okay, so now we've got a financial model, we've got financial funding, we're off and running. So what we did is we outlined 3 different components of our customer 360 strategy. So the first is the actual MDM portion, which is, I think, why I'm invited to the call today. And so we needed to figure out what tools we were going to use, how do we put a stewardship process in place, how do we create an ownership model, and how do we make sure that we have technology in the middle of this to accelerate our journey. We also then needed to make sure that we standardized some processes. So what we did during this timeline, which I think is a little bit unusual, is we were in the middle of an upgrade of our Salesforce environment. So we went from Classic to Lightning. And so we did a lot to modernize some of the ways in which we transacted. You know, like many software companies, we're on a journey to move from perpetual business to subscription business. And so we used a lot of this customer data to be able to do our data migration into the new environment. But also we wanted to make sure that once we cleaned up the river, if you will, that these new processes stopped the river from being polluted any further, which I think is a really important point. So we wanted to make sure the operational processes supported the continuation of the improvement of that data. And then lastly, what we did is we created a Qlik analytics layer that is the Customer 360 app that I'm going to show you, which was how do we actually start to use this as a weapon to make sure that we don't, in theory, we're going to lose renewals. Let's make sure that in practice, we don't lose renewals. Let's make sure that in practice, we're able to execute a business review with our customers, understand how they're adopting our product, understanding if they're having any obstacles, and to understand any kind of concerns. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in action because it's really quite compelling to be able to use. Okay, great. Vision, strategy. Great. Now we're off and running. So the very first thing that we did once we started to get Reltio into place, we did a series of show and tells. And so part of the challenge, I think, for non-data people is that the foundational parts of data are somewhat difficult to understand. And so we had this, I thought, eye-opening assessment of what, how do we start to understand the nature of our data? So this is what we did in one of our very first show and tells that created, I thought, this kind of gigantic aha moment of what impact we were going to be able to make. So we had 325,000 accounts-ish in Salesforce, about 100,000 in NetSuite, and about 80,000 in Zora, which is a subscription management system. And for the most part, we had only the loosest of formats on how they all related to each other. And what we were able to do is within a couple of weeks, we were able to put them through a match and merge, and figure out that we really could get rid of, we had duplicates of about 108,000 of that. We had garbage for about 58,000, missing records, tests, different things. And that led across all of these different things to about 270,000 unique accounts, which represented 177,000 companies. 71,000 had done business with Qlik. So we did this in 2 weeks. We had never been able to do that in 25 years. And that was really super powerful. And in fact, still today, this is how we start to talk about our business. We start to talk about accounts. We start to talk about companies that do business with us. We talk about how many sales we have, install base, and that language part that I showed you in the beginning really sticks with us today. So we're really trying to make sure that there's clarity in terms of how we're trying to do it. So that was really quite powerful. Okay, so what we then did, I want to kind of tell you a little bit about our journey.
Hey, Joe, just quick question though for you. What's your recommendation about the ownership of data that comprises of pieces from other source which have different ownership?
Yes. So for us, I want to kind of go back up to this.
Yeah, that's when he asked.
Yeah. So if you think about this, these are almost always going to be owned by someone who owns that source system. These are going to have to be owned by somebody who understands some kind of combination, right? So in our case, for instance, how one calculates recurring revenue is actually a blend of data from 3 different systems, right? And ultimately, you just need to say, we need to have one centralized person on the hook for that. So in our case, sales wanted that number. We gave it to finance. We agreed that finance was a better holder of that. So that distinction is really important. The first, understanding that you're actually creating some net new piece of information that hasn't existed before. It has, but it's been created by different people in different parts of the organization, right? And so then putting owners around that. So we actually let people arm wrestle. Like we did this, we actually conducted this workshop the week before the world closed down for COVID. So I wonder how this would have gone if we had to do this remotely. But we really just got people in a room, flew them in from out of town, and really talked through 256 domains one at a time. And ultimately, you're trying to agree on what it is important to standardize. And by the way, there's some other stuff that you might say, it isn't important for me to standardize, so just leave it alone.
Thank you.
All right.
A couple more questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So one is, will you be sharing some insights on how you tackled identified duplicates or potential duplicates, high-level match merge criteria for accounts and addresses?
No.
Okay. Not today. Okay. And then how are you using D&B data today? Are you using the real-time connector, and what hierarchy information is it providing you?
Yeah. So the way that we have it is we do have a real-time connector. So as an account comes in, we tag it with a DUNS number. And then with that DUNS number comes a DUNS parent. So we're able to kind of tie it into the proper hierarchy. And then what we'll do is we create a variation of that hierarchy that is our own Qlik hierarchy that's basically built from the DUNS number, but we have the ability, there's kind of a like-for-like copy, and then we are able to change it. So a good example of that is Benjamin Moore. We don't have roll up into Berkshire Hathaway because we don't want our customers to roll up that way. So we're working right now on creating a different relationship type. This is actually one of the things that we're trying to figure out. The visualizations in Reltio treat hierarchies as one relationship type on the screen. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to work out is we would prefer if there were different kinds of relationships that you could connect, right? So this one's connected because D&B says so. This one's connected because we say so, etc. But right now what we're doing is we're basically trying to, we create a replica that is the Qlik hierarchy that is based on the D&B hierarchy, what it's telling us. So when a customer comes in, we do 4 things. We dedupe it first based on the match rules. Number 2, we do a data quality address standardization. And that is principally because of number 3, it'll hit D&B with more accuracy. So if you don't clean up the addresses, you get a weaker D&B hit. And then the 4th is putting into the right hierarchy. So those are the 4 steps that we go through at time of new account entry. And that's part of the stop polluting the river part of our job.
Yeah, one last question for now is, are you concerned with different locations with the company/customer?
Very much, yeah. So so we will have different accounts in Salesforce that represent different places and times, and it's challenging because territory management, we might have somebody that owns an account in Europe and another person that owns that same account in the US. So we do not maintain a kind of a flat hierarchy. This is everything of Siemens, right? We maintain all the different levels of the hierarchy, largely so they can be portioned off in different kinds of ways. So maybe the national headquarters is applicable for territory assignment, but for financial reporting, we'll roll it up all together. But yeah, it's all about the hierarchies.
Okay, and I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to save those and let you kind of go into the demo and things, and then start asking after that.
A couple of questions from the DUNS part of it, right? From DNB, are you getting control relationships and significant influence, or what kind of relationships you are getting from DUNS?
Yeah, so for us right now, we are not doing that. We have different marketing tools that we use for that kind of stuff. So for us, the principal goal is really just parent-child relationships in the hierarchy.
You're just getting the immediate parent from DNB.
Yep. Yeah.
And then are you enriching hierarchy information with stewards on your Qlik hierarchy kind of a thing? So that's a manual process after the record is landed into MDM.
That's right. That's right. And we've been trying to work with Reltio for how to automate some of that, because it can be a manual pain in the neck if you're trying to recreate all those hierarchies one by one. But we have a batch job that we have that effectively creates the hierarchy and does a copy from DUNS, and then we can tweak it. But we have 6 full-time stewards that were part of our business case. And that's what we did.
And my last question on this particular part, you just said 4 things, right? One is, dedupe. Dedupe is like you're doing a search before create kind of a thing, search match kind of a thing. You're doing it before you landing the data. And then you're doing DQ in process, right? Dash service. And DNB also calling it real time before the data is landed into MDM.
Yeah.
And the hierarchy also, you're creating it as part of the landing into MDM as a system of record, or you're doing it after it lands?
Well, so it will land, and then we do all the different services. So what we've done, this is a good question. We have a flag on our Salesforce record that is a validation flag, and one can have an account, one can create an opportunity against that account and forecast deals, but you can't create a quotation unless it's been validated. And so from the time that moment where the account lands to the time that a quote happens is usually a month. Sometimes it's years, but sometimes it's usually often a month. And during that time frame, the steward will actually make sure that all 4 of those steps are completed satisfactorily, and then change the status to validate it so that the business can continue.
That's mostly to do with the customer onboarding process before you do it. Like you can always even, in our case, we have integrated with BoardX and other stuff to get the directors' information and other stuff to look at there if they have any legal cases pending and other stuff. And that is used as a research process for doing this validation. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and by the way, if other people have really world-class ways of doing that, like what I just described, if we are fantasizing about trying to turn that into something real time so that we don't have to have stewards spending the time, don't have to have any friction in our quote creation process. But once you let that account loose, it messes up everything, right? You'll have duplicate accounts in your system, duplicate quotes, difficult with the rollout. So even if you start to roll them up in a hierarchy, the cow is often out of the barn. So we've since October of last year when we went live, we've kind of overcorrected a little bit so that we're more manually asserting control over those hierarchies. But we're exploring some use of the Salesforce connector for some of that. We haven't implemented it, but we're in the middle of a POC for that. But all of those techniques are kind of on the table for us to try and figure out what we can do to automate that process in real time.
Great. And Joe, we have lots of other questions, but I'm going to let you go, and then we can ask them at the end here.
Okay.
That's fair.
There's one question here that is related to timeline. And so this is basically effectively how we did it in terms of like what is ready for prime time. And there was another question that was all the customers in the US. No, actually, Qlik was born in Sweden. So probably 60% of our 38,000 customers are European. And I guess, so let's say it's 60, 30, 10, 60 European, 30 US, Americas, and 10 Asia Pac. And so what we did is we started to think critically about, we got the licenses in October of 2020. So again, the office was formed in January of 2020. We worked through the business case through the summer. We got our first licenses in October of 2020. And after 3 months, we had what you see on the left up and running, which I would call an analytical MDM. We've got the matches up and running. People are using it in an analytical environment. And so we have the stewards, they're correcting things after the fact, but you can see it's a reactive, not a proactive. And then after 11 months, we inserted Reltio into the operational processes as I just described. So as new data comes on, those stewards are invoking those services to do those real 4-time steps. We do the real-time sync, and then they're controlling that both in the preventative and in the reporting, so operational and analytical. So this is the time frame of how we set it up. And then in terms of how we are architected, this is our analytics landscape. So we have one of the things that we do that is actually really important to a SaaS software company is what's actually happening inside the environment. Are people adopting the features that you're rolling out? Do you have adoption of your software? So you've rolled it out to 100 users, or 100 users using it, or are only 30 people using it? So you're really trying to get a sense of what's going on. Also defects. And so let's say there was a defect, you'd want to know who's using that and which customers are affected by different things. So we have this kind of real-time stream via Kafka of what's happening inside of all of that in the SaaS environment. So of course, every single one of those tenants is connected to a customer ID. So we have down here our applications. Reltio is our operational integration between Salesforce and Oracle and marketing into Tango. These are kind of our 4 operational systems that we use. We have a ton of other things, Google Analytics and Workday, Auth0 and Zift1, different kinds of things that we're doing. We have our own replication technology, and that all goes into a big Snowflake environment. We use Atlan as our governance framework. So how do you make sure that, remember I said that we want to make sure that the terms are agreed on, that the calculations are agreed on. We store that here in Atlan. Atlan, you might use Elation or Calibra or something like that. This is how we do it. We do our transformations in dbt. These are kind of SQL orchestration steps that happen directly in the Snowflake environment. And so in come the red circles, if you will, and dbt helps us to create the green circles. These are the different kind of data assets that are available to us, different domains that are there. And then we have a catalog that can service up into our analytics environment, and then also service into our data science environment, right? So this is how the whole thing fits together, and we are 100% cloud-based. So all of this is happening in AWS. A lot of these things are happening in AWS, but like most of your SaaS vendors, we don't care where you live. We just take your data and we're off and running with that. So this is kind of just to give you a context of where where things live and how things work. And what I'm going to show you is what the end result actually looks like. So there are a couple questions here before I go into this about matching and stuff. So I didn't really bring a lot of statistics around how we're matching, what the match ranging is, the unmerging and different things like that. I'm happy to kind of come back and do that at some point, but that wasn't something that I came prepared to talk about. Okay. All right. So
one quick question. You mentioned the cataloging kind of a thing, right? Did you do it after you got MDM, like assigning MDM master data attribute to a business term kind of a thing? How did you go about? Because that's a very interesting use case between MDM and data governance.
Yeah. So let me show you what the catalog looks like, because it's actually a mix of. It's not only master data types of things. So what I'm going to show you first, I'm going to show you our MDM app, and then I'm going to show you how the data is reflected in our catalog. So what you're looking at right now is the Qlik console. And so this is for people not familiar with the tool, and I have no reason to think that you are. Oops, I knew that was going to happen. I was going to have to refresh. So there's an analytics application that has all sorts of information that we can put together. And so just to give you a kind of a high level of what we have about our customers, we can track our recurring revenue. We can track what's been closed and lost, pipeline, consulting. This is net promoter score, customer satisfaction. If a customer has agreed to be a reference for us, we track the documentation that they've agreed to provide with dates and such. We also can track whether or not they're using, like, what is their SaaS product usage, the Qlik SaaS product. And just so everyone's clear, this is another thing where we don't take any information about the data itself, the apps itself. We're more interested in how many users have logged on, what features are being used. So we're very careful not to invade people's privacy when doing that. We can tell what licenses they have, how many cases they have. So imagine that you are a customer support manager and you want to go have a conversation with your sponsor. You can, with one fell swoop, walk your customer through these different things and understand the nature of that relationship in totality. So what I want to show you here is how we've started to integrate Reltio into this process. So we created these are a list of our customers here. And so what you see here is there's a bunch of customers. And what we did is we made these ultimate parents. So we said, if you put the word Qlik in there, that means that we have gone about the creation of a Qlik global ultimate. So if I just take, for instance, I know that I mentioned Siemens before. So this is a global ultimate, and I'm going to be very careful not to show you sensitive information, but these are all of the name. These are all of the accounts that roll up into that hierarchy, right? And so some of the questions that you've had before have been around, like, how does D&B help? Well, there's no way that we would have known, unless you had some special insight, that Atos was actually owned by Siemens. And so these are legal hierarchies that were recommended to us by that, right? So, and we have different kinds of subdivisions of Beijing, certified, blah, 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 blah. You get the basic idea. What the idea here is that we can do is, at any one of the point of these times, I can pick one and start to understand what the legal entity name is. And this is a reflection of what's in our NetSuite. There's a thing that we created that was called, before we had Reltio, we created this idea of a portfolio ID, which was meant to be a grouping of customers. It was crappy. This is our MDM ID, and this is the actual URL. So you can actually start to zip around and start to figure out if you were looking for something in particular, like, let's say I was looking for Siemens Spain. I don't even know if it is. Let's do this. That. I could find that guy, and like, I'm trying to figure out where he is. Does he have an MDM ID? Does he have a legal name? Is he in Salesforce? What's the ID? And effectively, you have all complete cross references to what you're looking at here, right? But for the most part, what we're trying to do is to say, the whole reason I'm here is that I'm trying to look at something holistically as one overall customer. And I'm going to show you one that's actually somewhat interesting. And I'm going to be careful. I'm going to show you, first of all, parts without much financial sensitivity. And then I'm going to show you a little bit something where I can mask some of the details here. This is the government of France. And so what you can see in the government of France is, you have lots of different things, like you've got airports, and you've got transit authorities and different kinds of things like that. So right now what I've done is I've selected, tell me everything about the nature of my relationship with the government of France. And for the time being, I'm going to come back to this, but I'm going to skip these four because they're a little bit more on the sensitive side in terms of our financial relationship. Let me start here with consulting. So what you have here is, here are the different parts of the government of France: transportation, energy, commerce, and here are the projects that they've done. Here are the projects that have been completed, in progress. And if you wanted to, you could get to a link here to actually take you to the projects. You get a sense of how active they've been in professional services with us over the past few years, right? So some trending there, cool. And then, but you might say, how are they actually feeding us, feeling about us? Or how's that sentiment score? So this is Net Promoter Score. So SNCF, this is the Société Nationale de Chemin de Fer. I'm sure you're super impressed that I knew that. That's the train station in France. They don't like us, right? We did something. They are a detractor. This is useful to know. So then there are other parts of the organization that seem like they're really promoting us. These are the surveys, and this is kind of the average score. But it certainly seems like it's good to know that the promoter score of the trains is not exactly where it needs to be. That's something for our service people to follow up on. How about generally your satisfaction with Qlik services? Well, so here are the different parts of the organization that filled out the response, and here's how they feel about our sales, and here's how they feel about our partner services, products, etc. Okay, good. We're on a 5-point scale. They're feeling pretty good, but that CSAT for support looks like it needs a little help. And again, these are the guys I want to touch base with, right? Useful information.
One, because community looks really good, so that's all.
And then, so this is, do these guys, have they agreed to do some references for us? Well, turns out, sure. And this asset was created in 2015. This is interesting. These are the guys that seem like they don't like us very much, but they have a reference out there. Even more of a reason for me to go double back and figure out what's going on with those guys. All right, and then over here, what we have is, these are all tenants that these guys have. I want to know, how's it going? So, here's a company that has 11 SaaS tenants. And so we can figure out how many users have been allocated, how many have been entitled, how many have been allocated. This is a sign of something that's great. You've got 100% of those users have been allocated, active users all the time. This is great. These guys look happy. And then you can have some down here, 200 users, only 2% have been allocated. I might want to see what's going on. You guys need some help. How's that going? Because renewal might be a bear if we can't figure out what's going on. So you get a sense of kind of like what's going on across the different things. And so, I don't want this to be a commercial for Qlik. I mean, I would love for it to be a commercial for Qlik. If you don't have it, you should definitely get some. But at the end of the day, you can basically see that the power under here is, how do I bind together this relationship? So what I'm going to do, just to kind of give you a sense of some other things, is I'm going to bind together lots of different things that are going to start to obfuscate some of the numbers here so that you can't exactly see what's going on by account, but it gives you a sense of kind of what we've built. Just pick some customers at random. And now what I can do is I can go into these sheets and say, here's my revenue, here's how it looks by account, here's how it's growing. I can look at some things around what is my close one analysis looking like? How am I growing over time in these different accounts? What am I selling? I can do some things around what has actually been closed one over the last thing, and the rolling pipeline before I get to the projects, right? So again, I don't want to necessarily drown you on all of these different topics, but that's ultimately what our Customer 360 app is all about. Now, with respect to the catalog itself, what you have here is, these are analytic applications. So we think about data products being really divided into a number of categories. You can have analytics products. So you just saw one of our analytics products. You also have some things around, how sales is performing, how the incidents are going, all these different things. But we also have the ability to have, you can also have data products, right? So we've been able to put some data products into the catalog. And so this, I think, is the answer to the question of what's living here. What we do is we put data assets into our governance catalog. It syncs up with our analytics catalog, and then those things become searchable here, depending on what it is that I want to look at. So I could look for some different kind of sales assets, and they would become available to me. And you can see sometimes it's a mix. They could be CSVs, they could be different things in Excel, they could be things in Snowflake, depending on what data assets are here made available to me. So the idea here is that we're trying to enrich the quality of assets that we are managing, while not necessarily disabling people from importing some things. They're just not certified in that respect. So let me pause there for a second before I take it home. Let's take a look at some of the questions here.
Matching emerging ones, but how long did it take for you to reach the point to where you were comfortable with the quality of data coming into MDM? Coming out of MDM, sorry.
So we were within 3 months, we had our data model, we had the data going, we had the matching rule and the matching going. So the reason I'm very careful to call out a distinction between analytical MDM and operational MDM is I think that the threshold for trusting an analytical MDM is way lower. Right. So if I happen to have 3 duplicate Siemens instead of 1, like no one's going to go to jail. In an operational context, the stakes are way higher because you're actually blocking people from doing business. So that was closer to a year before we got that part up and running and felt comfortable with the group. And that's not only the technology and the matches, but people's ability to know how is that validation process going to work.
Yeah, and I think that answers the question, was there progression to the improvement in quality of your data? So,
oh, absolutely.
There was a comment here. I'm not going to read Ilof's comment. Are your customers in USA? You already answered that. Did we have any issues where customers have shared address and vanity address details for unique identification of customer record?
Yeah. So vanity addresses are they're always a trick. My experience is you rarely get a hit on those things when you're doing D&B, which is part of the process, part of the reason that we needed that manual process. So yeah, we do maintain alternative addresses in cases where they do a match, and we are allowing for, if a sales rep has something that the customer prefers, we allow them to keep alternate addresses. So we don't only keep the legal address.
Okay. Are you sending any cleansed, standardized data back from Reltio to operational systems like Salesforce, NetSuite, Marketo, et cetera?
Yeah. And so effectively where we are right now is this hub is the center of the universe. So when a change happens from one of the edge systems, it goes in, and then Reltio decides whether or not the survivorship rules apply and then send that respective data back to different places. So when a new customer happens, it's sent from our CRM system, which is Salesforce, into NetSuite for booking. When there's an update for billing purposes, it sends another, let's say there's a supplemental billing address, it would send it back into Reltio. And so we have an orchestration process that tries to make sure that there is a certain amount of data that needs to be kept in sync depending on the system that's connecting to it. And then what we'll do is we'll send it back and forth based on those rules.
Okay. And I don't know if you have this percentage, but what percentage of data is still manually collected versus automated? I know you kind of sort of talked about that.
Yeah, I think part of the what I would say is 100% we attempt to automate, right? So I talked about the 4 things that we need to look for. Every single time we attempt to automate it the first time. What you find is that the DUNS hits are not quite as strong as they are the further you get from New York City. So Americans' addresses tend to be quite good. Some of the European addresses are good, but there's a lot of manual follow-up, especially as you're starting to get to Asia with the hierarchies and follow-up that's associated with that. And one of the things that's kind of worthwhile getting into is Kurt Perlman asked, wouldn't Salesforce say that they could do all of this in Salesforce? And I think that the answer is really around they're not particularly, they're very good at trying to figure out how to simulate some of the 4 things I talked about, which is this a dupe? I can keep it out. But they're not particularly concerned around hierarchies. And in fact, before we had Reltio, we had an add-on system to Salesforce. So the idea of trying to maintain a complex hierarchy and maintain relationships and frankly, alternative relationships, they're really good at maintaining an account, right? And once you start to figure out that an account has to be bigger than an account, that there are complex affiliations, that's where we thought that Salesforce kind of broke down. So the reason those 2 to me feel connected is if you believe that maintaining complex account relationships is important, there's right now not great automation for some of that as addresses become a little bit more esoteric and there are not perfect address standardization tools out in the market. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all the questions that's in the chat for now. So you want to take us home?
One question on this analytical and operational MDM, right? So I was thinking that was very short period while we moved from analytical MDM to an operational MDM. Usually the journey takes, probably about a couple of years, right? So what was the trigger point of moving from analytical to operational so early?
Yeah. So first of all, just so it doesn't sound super aggressive, we have the luxury of having a pretty simple backend. We have 1 CRM system, 1 ERP system, 1 marketing automation system, right? So it's not like my previous role was at TD Bank where we had 2,000 corporate systems. I think we have about 250. So you're not really talking about a super sophisticated integration process there. But the actual real catalyst was our upgrade of Salesforce created an opportunity for us to not have to stop polluting the river. And so we took it. And so we kind of jumped on a moment opportunistically, arguably unwisely, but that's kind of how we thought about it, that we wanted to jump into the fray. So we weren't, we kind of figured we'd be better off kind of jumping in as opposed to waiting for it.
The question on terms of customer experience and net promoter score, and what are the different source systems which you have taken other than MDM to get this net promoter score, customer experience, and whatever customer things where they're leveraging customer 360?
So we use Qualtrics for customer feedback, and we send out surveys. And so we right now have about 80 sources of data. So I know I'm kind of talking, our transactional backbone is relatively simple, right? In terms of what we're operationally integrating to, it's basically Salesforce and NetSuite. That's why you shouldn't be over the top impressed by operational integration in that point. But with respect to the analytical integration, there are about 85 different sources of data, including Qualtrics and survey data that comes back, and different things like that to help us with that.
All right, that's all the questions we're going to take for today. But Joe, thank you so much.
All right, let me just finish strong, as they say. So that's our journey in terms of where we are with accounts, and where we're headed next is we are trying to, like many other people, trying to increase our digital footprint, right? How do we make it so that the customers and prospects can interact with us a little bit more seamlessly digitally, which requires a higher brand of contact management than we have right now. So we're looking at Reltio to help us with some contact management. We are also looking at a way to simplify and standardizing our new product onboarding, and then a way to improve our overall reference data. So, anyone who takes a look at that presentation goes, great, you've got one domain down, 4 or 5 to go. It was an impactful one, and it gave us some credibility, but there's more to come with respect to these other domains.
That one of the things that you've it's stuck in my mind. You said this a long time ago, probably a year ago. You said, one thing about master data management is when you're talking to business holders, you don't talk about master data management. It's kind of like Fight Club, right? You just talk about the business outcomes and those kinds of things. And that just stuck with me for a long time. So, Joe, thank you so much for coming. Really do appreciate it. This is lots of great questions, lots of great content, and really helps us out a lot, for people to hear your story. So thank you, everyone. And Joe, thanks so much.
Yeah, and for those of you guys who, I think we're all trying to solve a lot of the same problems. So I don't, hopefully no one says like, well, look at us, we've got all this figured out. If other people have ideas, I'd love to hear from you in terms of things that have helped you with onboarding processes or triggers in the process that have helped improve the operational integration. We're all in this together. So happy to contribute and happy to hear.
Yeah, no, I mean, we need more stories like this, right? So that people know, so that they can connect with each other. That's what this is about. So, all right, thanks everyone. Please take the survey at the end. So when you leave Zoom, basically a survey will pop up, and please take that. It's very short, takes you like 3 minutes. So thanks everyone. Thanks again, Joe.
Bye.
All right, take care.